know traditional livestock are really inefficient. There's this big issue around unsustainable protein. What solutions are being addressed to combat this? I really wanted to focus on something that could really empower the individual to produce their own source. From the solutions, I looked at insects were the best contender.
Hi Thomas, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and to talk to us. I have so many questions. I can't wait to learn about you and your business. But yeah, welcome and thank you for being here.
Rosie, Jeremy, thank you for having me. Yeah, excited to talk to you both.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us about bugs. This is going to be such an interesting conversation, I feel. You're basically friend with previous guest on the show, Hugo. We recorded an episode last year with him, I think, about 1 year ago. And yeah, he's a videographer, photographer. And a few weeks ago, he was taking pictures of insects and bugs. And I was like, what are you doing? It obviously caught my attention. And I was like, I need to know more about that. So that's why I reached out to you to understand a little bit more. And I've got to say, like, your website and your Instagram are very, very intriguing. So you are the founder of The Bug Factory, and your tagline is the future of sustainable pet food. And you basically create food from insects and like worms and larvae and stuff like that. And I feel I've got to start with like, how did you get into the bug business?
Yeah, great question. I mean, so typically when the first thing I get asked by people when they find out what I do, they say like, why bugs? And yeah, I mean, that kind of comes back from kind of my upbringing. I was born and raised in like the middle of nowhere in the English countryside. Had loads of pets, from, dogs, cats to like chickens, reptiles, birds, amphibians, loads of stuff. Not all at the same time, mind you, like different stages. Otherwise
I was going to say, did you live in a zoo? Because it sounds like
separate. I mean, separate. But I did have 3 lizards living in my room, like some like Egyptian dabtail and leopard geckos. So really, really comfortable with animals. Grew up. And the more I grew up, the more interested in design and art I became. And then and then at university, I studied industrial design and technology. And during that 4-year course, the last year you spend doing a project, your main project can be about whatever you want. And I was like, okay, well, I've got a year. I want to do something that I'm passionate about, sustainability. So I was like, okay, what major issues are happening in the world? Right. And one of the things that really piqued my interest was protein consumption and production. And I'm sure we're kind of all aware of how we now need more efficient proteins. We know traditional livestock, especially cows, are really inefficient. So I was like, okay, there's this big issue around unsustainable protein. There's a rising middle class, a rising population. There's a huge demand for increased protein. Yeah. What solutions are being addressed to combat this? So I was researching and I saw these great solutions from plant protein to algae to lab-grown meat to insects. And I was like, oh, all these seem really cool. But I really wanted to focus on something that could really empower the individual to produce their own source. So actually give them the tools. So from the solutions, I looked at insects were the best contender to actually allow someone to have an affordable homegrown supply of protein. So the initial concept wasn't actually for pets, it was actually for humans. It was a more futuristic way that humans could actually grow insects in their home. So then I spent a year designing concepts, researching to this, and developed a prototype that is kind of the precursor to what we're doing now. And this was back in 2017, 2018. And then that was kind of the concept. So it was essentially, if people are listening to this and they want to, I'd say look at the website, just look at the bugfactory.co.uk just to see what we're talking about, just because it's a bit abstract. But essentially, it's a small device similar to that of a microwave size that can be placed in a home and can allow someone to essentially recycle their food waste, like if you have fresh fruit or vegetables, put that in there, and then you can actually grow insects. So our pods are made around the life cycle of the mealworm. So it's bespoke to that life cycle. So it's kind of similar to a caterpillar. You have the egg, you then have kind of the chrysalis pupa stage, you then have the caterpillar, which is, in this case, is a mealworm. and then it turns into a beetle. So it's kind of a 4-stage life cycle. It's comparable to like, a butterfly, but it's based around that life cycle specifically. And then I designed it. It got some recognition, won some design awards. I was like, you know what? I've been trained as a designer. I want to work as a designer. So I was then interning and working as a junior designer in a London design agency. But then in the back of my mind, I was like, you know what? I want to develop this idea I had. I had a bit of an itching to do something a bit different, because a lot of my peers and colleagues, there's quite like a traditional route you do as a designer. You start off as a junior, then become middle, then a senior. But then I was like, you know what? I have time for that. I can do that later. Let's try and do something a bit more, a bit more risky, something a bit more that, a bit more unique and a bit more fun. So then I joined a incubator back in 2019. And then I launched the initial concept on Kickstarter back in 2020. And that was really still at this stage was still for human consumption. And we sold close to 350 units. So we made like 22K, which was cool. But we quickly learned, which was the main reason why we were doing it, was to test our assumptions to see if the human market was ready, or if we should go, or if we should position this to the pet market. And then, surprise, surprise, we learned that it was more applicable to the pet owners, because, it's one thing, people eating insects from a protein powder or a protein bar. It's another thing saying, all right, here's how you can grow your insects, and here's how you can, turn the insects into actual food. So it was almost a niche of a niche. But pet owners, especially pet owners who have, kind of small animals, like amphibians, reptiles, wild birds, poultry. A lot of these pet owners actually currently feed and need their pets to eat these sorts of insects. So it's a much easier sell, and allows us to kind of try and penetrate that market and then expand outwards. So we're now at the really cool stage where we've raised investment. We now have a team. We'll be launching our redesigned version in a few months later this year. So it's a really exciting, dynamic time. And I guess it kind of, to bring it back to your question, it really kind of started off as a design idea, then a kind of project, and now we've raised investments, and now we're turning it into a serious company. It's kind of having a blast along the way. I also wouldn't have thought I'd been doing this if you asked me a few years ago.
Isn't it funny how life has a way of doing that to you?
Yeah. 100%. I think, you just can't. I mean, I often think as long as you're doing something, as long as you know kind of roughly what you want to be doing. Like, so for myself, I love design, sustainability. So I kind of know I want to be kind of over here. So no matter which way I go, as long as I'm kind of going in this generic direction, I know I'll be decent. But if I'm doing something over here, I'm like, okay, well, I like this. I'm going this direction. Maybe I should tack back and do something that I'm more passionate about. That gets me excited.
It's so interesting you mentioned about the human consumption, because I've kind of read the same things about sustainability, about eating less meat and cows and things like that, and how there's so much protein in bugs. And I think it's one thing to know that information and to have the knowledge and be like, okay, I should be eating bugs because it's better for everything and everyone. Sustainability, all the rest of it that goes into it. But there's nothing to actually go ahead and eat bugs. And I think especially, like you said, to grow them yourself. But it's interesting. I think we're probably just a stage before doing that, maybe. I think it's something that we could do in the future. I think it's just still probably quite a new idea that...
Yeah, you need, it's like every change in society, you need the early adopters, right? To reach the first 5% or whatever before it actually takes off and create a real behavioral society change, like on a big market. You need those early adopters at the beginning to spread the word and kick everything off.
Yeah, 100%. And especially with things as like, culturally and like emotionally attached as food, these things take, years, decades to really kind of integrate in a society. I mean, I've grown up, I was born in 95. So I've grown up, as an adult in the past, I've grown up to this century, in the past 10 years, and I'm really used to the idea of sushi. I walk into Tesco Express or any supermarket in the UK here, they'll be you can get some sushi. Whereas a decade or two ago that wouldn't be the case. My grandparents, you know, that they're like kind of, you know, from Europe, so they're not really accustomed to the idea of raw fish. They're a bit like ooh, like I wouldn't eat that. You know, and
Yeah.
so like sushi is one example, but like, you know, also there's oysters. You know, oysters used to be deemed, you know, oysters weren't popular, and then they got rare. You know, similar to lobsters back in the last like 100 years ago, back in America, they were fed to prisoners, and then, you know, then things changed. So like, it's funny, but like, but especially food wise, that this takes time. So especially with something as niche as insects, it's trying to get them, persuade people to kind of eat them in, like, you know, a stage by stage thing. But I mean, Rosie, what you just said is like, I mean, it's literally the definition of cognitive dissonance, where you have two conflicting ideas of, like, you know, oh, insects, they're sustainable, high in protein, you know, they're good for the planet, good for me, and then, oh, insects, you know, don't they live in dirt, you know, they're disgusting, you know, ooh, yuck, 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 I'll never, you know.
I think I've actually bought bugs as like a joke present for Jeremy's cousins once, like lollipops with bugs in it, and we were like, oh my god, there's bugs in it. Yeah, but you've got to eat it. And I don't think they even ate them. I think they were just too grossed out. And it's kind of, there's kind of that novelty of it being like a fun and exciting thing, but not something that I would yet take seriously. But I think it's just a mindset shift, isn't it? Like you said, is like, it's, you know, bugs aren't disgusting. And especially if you're growing them yourself, you know what you're giving them and you know where they've come from. And there's kind of that whole thing as well, which I think is interesting. Because I think there's a whole thing as well with the food industries. You don't really know where your food comes from. No. You might be getting avocados from Brazil and then something else from somewhere else. And there's that whole carbon footprint of, you know, moving food about around the world as well. Whereas if you're actually growing them yourself, there's that sustainability side as well, which is like another layer. So yeah, it's so interesting.
It's also very cultural because, I mean, I haven't been, but I know in Asia, in some countries, they do eat bugs in the street. Like you can have like street food of
snakes,
I don't know, like
scorpions,
scorpions and stuff like that. So it is cultural also. It's just not a Western thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, like insects. I mean, again, this is one of the reasons why we kind of pivoted to the pet sector, because it was it didn't have these barriers. But I mean, for the edible insect market, I mean, yeah, hit the nail on the head there. There's like 2 billion people in the world eat insects, you know, and there's over 2,000 different kinds of edible insects. So the variations in different insects is huge. So like different places, like, you know, in Nigeria compared to like Thailand, what they would eat there and consume are very, very different. You know, they wouldn't really eat the same things. It's a bit like, you know, it's almost a stretch of saying like, you know, you eat mammal. You know, no one really says, oh, I eat mammal. It's like, no, I eat kind of cow or like, you know, pig. Yeah. So like, yeah, it's very, very broad and very, very kind of like decentralized in the sense of, because there's so much variety. So yeah, it's really interesting. But this is an area that, as this decade proceeds, will become more and more important, because this is a growing concern. And in those regions where insects are already consumed, it's a much easier sell, and the industry can be built there much quicker for edible insects. Whereas in the West, you know, pet feed is a really, really effective way of converting and turning, you know, a produce into high protein pet feed, which, you know, can reduce emissions and increase quality and reduce costs, importantly.
Sorry, I keep cutting you off. I was going to say though, but you just said about the costs as well, because I was thinking that must be a hell of a lot cheaper, especially if we've got like a big dog that eats a lot of food. It must be a lot cheaper to feed them insects than it would be to buy them like steaks and like that meat food that you buy in the supermarkets, because that can add up, especially if you have 1 or 2 dogs and cats, and, you know, people have multiple animals in their home. So it must really reduce the costs as well.
Yeah, so right now our V1 version, which we're launching in a few months, is just for kind of, as I say, kind of smaller animals. So like, you know, and like the more animals that are traditionally known for eating insects. So like, you know, wild birds, poultry, amphibians, reptiles, and also fishing. But in the V2 version, which we've started to design and will be launching hopefully next year, is a much more sophisticated product. And that will be based around larger animals, including like dogs and cats, so that there will be like this ability to actually save money and like offset the monthly or the weekly, you know, expenditure you have on these animals, because they're so costly. And also, like, you know, pets are part of the family. You know, people just are, especially like, you know, younger generations just freaking love their pets. You know, I think Mars Pet Care released a study last year actually saying that people in the UK, pet owners, spend 2.5 times more on their pets than they do on their own babies. So it's kind of
Wow.
I mean, it's also a bit disingenuous because I think these things are broken down into like, lifetime expenditure, and you have a baby for like, a few years, whereas you have a pet for like, a decade or two.
Yeah.
But still, it shows, the realities of like,
Yeah.
having a pet is a lucrative industry, and people are increasingly spending more money on their pets. So these areas of like, producing something that is sustainable, affordable, and nutritious, I think has real commercial legs, and that's why I'm really excited to launch it in the next couple of months. So yeah, like we'll see. Yeah, it's a very exciting time.
So I have plenty of questions to dive into the business and stuff like that. But before that, I like to go back into the beginning of the story. And because, like you have a background in design, went to school for that. And I'm pretty sure, you could, and I mean, you did for a while, but you could have a pretty good career in this specific field. And how was it welcomed by family or friends? Like, I'm gonna go put all that aside and design a pod to grow bugs at home. How was that welcome?
Yeah, well, I think, actually, I think at the time when I was debating this, I was actually more so focused around trying to find a traditional job in the design world. And then my parents they were like, well, Tom, you have all your life, like, you're a smart kid, you've got a degree in design, from one of the best design universities in the country. You have all your life to be focusing on those sorts of things. Why not take a risk and do something for yourself and have some fun? And then I thought about it more, and I was like, you know what? Why wouldn't I? I think the more riskier thing would be not taking the risk now. But yeah, my parents were super supportive of the of doing this startup. Having some fun with basically an idea I came up with. They were super supportive. I was actually a little bit more hesitant at the start. I was a bit like, oh, all my friends are getting jobs. I have to start my career. I need a pension. I need to get a house. Blah blah. And then they're like, well, like just at the very least, to have fun with it for a year, see where you can take this. And I was like, you know what, like that's like they were super supportive, and like they helped me out with like. Because at the start, like, I mean, I'm really blessed. Like, not everyone has the luxury of who can take the time to do this.
Yeah.
Some people need to be earning a salary right off the bat, whereas I could do a little bit of freelancing. My parents also helped with some of my rent, so like it allowed me that time to like make some mistakes, learn a bit, and then raise investment and now become more self-sufficient. But like really, really blessed for them helping me out and like allowing me to actually. Have the luxury to take a risk.
Yeah.
And then for my friends, I think a lot of them were like, they just had it funny. They were just loving it. I think if I took any longer to like get the ball rolling, because COVID happened when I was kind of like in this period, and like there's a little bit of like meandering before we raised investment. So I think if I took any longer to raise investment and start like showing more signs of progress, I would have started to be like, I feel a bit embarrassed about what I'm doing. But people just, I think I get nothing from that support. I think, especially with a lot of my friends, they kind of find it. Some of them have told me they find it, kind of like inspiring to see like someone do something from an idea and move it forward. And the likelihood is like most startups do fail. That's the reality of things. If you're a betting man, you'll probably bet against it, or betting person, you'll bet against it or being a success. But I think in life, like so much is not about like the end destination. It's about the journey. So like things I'm doing right now, like I wouldn't have thought I would have done. So like and there's all these weird things. I think some people who I love to listen to from a more like startup world call it like career capital. In the early stage, you need to be doing stuff just like you guys. Doing a podcast, exploring things. Just doing a range of things and taking those risks, because ultimately those risks, not taking the risks, could actually be riskier. And then in doing more risky things, you can then acquire more social capital that will pay huge dividends in the future. Yeah. But you don't really know how right now. So, I just try and say yes as much as I can these days, within reason. So I can kind of just push. If I don't feel pressure, I need a little bit of pressure to like, have fun. I think I think a third of my time is, I'm in my comfort zone. The other third of my time is like, I'm kind of like, treading water. I'm a bit like, I'm a little bit out of my depth. but not too much. I can kind of feel the ground. And then the other third, I'm just like way out in the ocean. I'm like, where the hell am I right now? So it's but everyone's been very supportive. I think there's people like it because I think I think that people are fans. I think especially my friends and family, they want to see people follow their passion and do well. So I've had really nothing but real positivity, to be honest.
Well, shout out to your parents for being amazing parents, because that's awesome, honestly. That's amazing. Are your parents entrepreneur or?
No.
Okay, it's not even that. Okay, because I was wondering, if like
they actually are. They actually are. I'd say they've had more traditional jobs, but also in the past few years they've been doing and exploring going like consulting, freelancing, doing things that are quite untypical. So yeah, actually, I quickly said no, but then I was like, wait a second. Yeah, they actually are. They are.
Well, that's amazing that the environment also gave you a chance to pursue this what could seem a crazy project, out of school and stuff like that. So that's amazing.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, also it's like one of the things I play a scenario in my mind's eye sometimes. It's just like when you as soon as you graduate, some people just run into a job. They're like, okay, I need typically where I'm kind of from the southeast of England, so like people are very close to London, so people are like, okay, I need to get a job, move to London, and then people they can take the first job that they kind of get, and then they're in that job, and then they're on a bad salary, but then they work a year or two, and they're like, oh, they're on an okay salary, but they don't really like the job. And then they kind of stay there for a few more years, and then they're like, oh, I've only done this I've only done this, so I should probably stay in this sector. And so I have this horrible scenario. If I've done that, you just kind of go into something not really thinking, and before you know it, you think that's the only skill set you have, and then you're kind of stuck in that industry and then you look back when you're 40 or something, and you're like, oh, maybe I should have done that. Maybe I should have done something different. But that's just in my mind's eye. I paint this picture to myself of just not really enjoying what you do.
Yeah,
I think it's very relevant, and I think as well when you start kind of buying a house and you've got a mortgage, or if you get married and have kids and do that whole thing, you've kind of then got responsibilities, and you're like, I probably can't quit my however much a year job to start a random business that might not work. So kind of when you're younger, when you don't have those responsibilities, is the time to do it. And the fact that you had your parents there to help you and support you, and your friends, and yeah, it's amazing. But I completely agree with that whole, you get stuck in a job and then it's so hard to leave because you get a promotion and then you think, oh, I might as well stay because then I'll get more money and stay in this job I hate, but at least what is paid the bills or whatever. So I think a lot of people can relate to what you just said.
Yeah, I think it's a real tough one. But on the flip side, sometimes you don't have the luxury of time. Sometimes you literally need to get in there. So it is tricky. It is tricky. But I'm very thankful I had the luxury of time, so I could think about what I wanted to do, have some fun with it. But also have confidence thrusted upon me, and also have enough self confidence to be like, you know what, I want to give this a try. And also ignorance, a huge amount of ignorance, which you need to have, because
sometimes ignorance is bliss, right? I mean, it's
if you're rational, it's a bit like, why would I start this? The chances of this working are low. Insects, it's a niche sector, so therefore it's like, if you wanted to dig into the maths, it's a bit like, maybe you shouldn't do this. But then it's a bit like, no, if you need to have that, you need to have that naivety at the start to push the boundaries and see what is possible. Otherwise, we'll live in a place that's filled with constraints where people really aren't pushing innovation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, without that, we won't have any innovation in the world anyway. So we need people like you to take, I would say, calculated risks, because it's also not completely stupid throwing yourself out of the window. I think it's more calculated risk. What you're doing, even if sometimes you don't. But it's still within a safe space. So it's But when you started, did you give yourself, in your mind, a kind of deadline? Okay, I need to make this work by this time, or raise money or whatever. Otherwise, I'm stopping and I'm going back to a normal job.
Yeah, no, exactly. So in my mind, actually this is so. I hope no one from my university is listening. Actually, no. Everyone knows this about me if they know me. Though. So I was never a fan of Loughborough University town. Like I didn't really like the area. So when I finished, I love the university. The university is fantastic. It's beautiful. But I wasn't really a fan of the town itself because it's quite a small student town. It's got a population of 40,000 people, half of which are students. I prefer big cities. Well, I prefer lots small cities. And then, so after graduating, I was then, as I said, working in London. But then I thought to myself, you know what, I want to kind of develop this, but I'm a designer. I don't know how. So I got into an incubator. But the incubator's main office was back at my university in Loughborough. So I was like, okay, I want to take this very seriously, like a job, for literally a year. I gave myself mentally a year. I was like, all right, let's see where we can take this in a year, and then if things aren't going well, aren't going bad, no problem, because you would have learned loads of great skills that you could then apply to other careers. But if you are showing traction, then you can then keep on going. But then doing so, I then was like, all right, to take this seriously, I need to have access to this office and the people in it and the mentors. 24/7. It has to be a job. So because I think it's quite easy if you're doing it by yourself in your room to start off very strong and then after a while lose motivation, especially when you're a sole founder, which can be really, really tough because you don't have someone to bounce off when you're feeling down. So I was like, all right, let's go back to Loughborough. And in my head, I was like, a little part of me was like, oh no, I'm regressing. Like I've graduated from here, I'm going back to here. So that was actually relatively tough for me to do that, to take that mental, I guess, step back, but it was a step forward. But when I told my friends I was going back, they're like, "What? Like, you don't like the town? Like, you're the least likely person to do that." I was like, "Well, I want to take it seriously for a year and give it my best, and then see where we go from there."
And it's interesting because you're a designer, and with my little knowledge about, your business, I feel the design part of your business is quite small. Like you're designing what you call pods, where you grow the insects and everything. But ultimately, it's an important part, but it's a small part of the entire business and the whole thing. How did you manage to get the skills to do everything else that the business requires?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, that was actually really tough. So that's a reason why I actually joined an incubator, just so you get access to mentorship, also bounce off other entrepreneurs who had better strengths than myself. So it was a learning curve. You're totally right. Design is just one small part of a business. There's so much stuff from the financials to the legals to the logistics, operations. Literally, even though it's a startup, it's just so much you have to do. It's a little bit scary at first, but once you kind of break it down and kind of get support. So I think for me, the key thing was firstly hearing experiences from people who had done similar things, who had run startups, and be like, look, it's all a bit chaotic and there's lots going on, but it's a process. You start off kind of little by little. You don't just dive into generating $1 million and having 10 employees. It starts off small by small, but really listening to mentors and people who have done it before, and being around people who could assist me, and outsourcing some of the key things. So some of legal advice, and also firstly getting recommendations from startup founders and CEOs who. What services they use, what tricks and tips they learn from the I guess the obvious stuff from legal or accounting to even meditation and making sure take time off, don't burn yourself out, take weekends off, or it's not bad to not work. Don't feel guilty if you're not working 24/7, because especially for the first bit of time, I felt everything, all the outputs determined by my inputs. So I was like, okay, I need to work hard. I need to really work hard. And a little part of it, my time was spent just on it, thinking of it in an hourly structure. So I was like, oh, I need to spend 10 hours a day doing this. But then the reality is, it's like, all right, well, if you're not being efficient for those 10 hours, you've only spent 4 hours working. You should have just done 4 hours. You've wasted your own time. You've actually wasted 6 hours of your time not doing that. So yeah, it was a mixture of just finding tips and tricks from founders to help me with my mental health, to physical health, to actual all right, here's what we recommend regarding raising investment, talk to these people or use a service, or don't do that, do it yourself, and a lot of it's been having to learn a lot myself, because I think you don't try and do as much. Well, I think as running a company, you should try in the early days is try and do as much as possible yourself, or at the very least understand it. So if you do need to talk to someone, you do know a little bit about what's going on, so you're not totally ignorant. But yeah, it does mean a lot of you have to. I'm not the biggest fan of reading, so a lot of podcasts and talking to people, and even where I am right now, our office space is a co-working space where it's filled with other entrepreneurs. So just literally earlier today, I spoke to someone about expansion to the US, and talking about US accounts and everything, and distributor rates, so it's all these things just be in the mix. Really, I like to be in the mix and just try and express ideas and talk, and really just, I would say, share, because ultimately I think at the start of people's journeys with being an entrepreneur or having an idea, it's oh no, you need to be oh, this is my idea, no one can know about it, no one can know. But I think I think especially also speaking to people in Europe and the UK, people are quite standoffish with ideas at the start. They're oh no, I'm not going to tell you, this is mine. Whereas I've spoken to some American colleagues, and they're it's much more open. It's all right, here's my idea, what do you think? And ultimately, if you tell someone your idea, and you're scared they're going to steal it, either it's a really bad idea because it can be so easy done by someone else, and it's probably not worth your time doing it. So you shouldn't really be scared about sharing your idea. Maybe don't share your patents. Yeah, sure. Yeah. But the idea itself, I think you have to talk.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And what has been the most challenging part for you, personally, with creating and now growing, running the business? What is the most challenging part for you that maybe you had to really bring someone in a team to help you out or whatever?
Yeah, so I've seen the most challenging part so far has been actually growing the team. So we actually, it's actually been really challenging hiring. So hiring and actually having to let someone go recently. So for me, this is all new. So it's been really, really kind of trial by fire in this regard. So it's been a real challenge of trying to find the people who are right fit for the right fit for the company, and also have the right skill set, so a cultural fit, and also have the right skills. So it's been really challenging because as a founder, doing this by myself for 18 months before making bringing other employees on, it's okay, well, I love this. This is my baby. I've been doing this. What you have to love it too, but it's no. It's a lot of people. It's a job. No one's gonna love it as much as I love it.
Yeah, you can't expect your employees to be as invested as you are.
Yeah, no, exactly right, and why should nor should they be, because it's it's more of a job. They haven't. It wasn't their idea that they started in a room by themselves. So it's trying to find people who have the passion and who are just, I would say, just the right fit, because going up, creating a company so early stage like ours is it's just an uphill battle. It's going up a mountain, and you need people who are real value add, who can help you get up there. You can't be having you can't be hiring people and then them being them slowing you down, because it's just so hard as it is. I'm trying to do this mountain, but I'm just holding onto this mountain by myself. So you need people who can be all right, let's give you a little step up. So it's, I would say, personally, it's just truly understanding what I need or what the company needs, due to my own lack of what I want to delegate or what needs to delegate, and what skill sets we're lacking, and who is the right person to fill that void. So I'd say, the hardest thing has definitely been expanding and growing the team. It's been a real challenge.
Just to counteract Jeremy's question, what has been your highlight? Has there been one moment when you're like, holy shit, what has just happened?
Oh, okay. I didn't realize we could swear, so
swear as much as you want.
I think I said frickin' earlier. But the highest points. I think one of the highest points for me was when I got my first bit of investor from an angel investor. So yeah, when he said so, I know a few investors, and then when I was ready to do the investment round, I remember approaching one of them and being like, "Hey, look, this is my pitch. This is my spiel. This is my deck. I want to run it through you and get your take." And then afterwards, after I did it, he was like, "You know what, Tom? Like, I actually want to invest." And I was like, "Oh yes." He's like, "Yeah, I like what you're doing. I've seen you grow the past year. You've got the determination. You have I think you're the person who can say what you're going to do, because ultimately all these things you're going to do in the future, it doesn't mean shit. Like, it's just literally stuff on paper. The thing that I'm buying into is you, your authenticity, and you being able to do what you say you can do." So I wasn't expecting him to invest. I was literally wanted him to rip what I was saying apart and say, like, do change this or do this. So getting that spontaneous first bit of investment from our first investor, I would say is one of the highlights. I was
gonna ask you about the investment part, because I think it's like, for me, I've never had to do that, and I hope I never have to, because it sounds terrifying. But I can't imagine like going to somebody being like, "Hey, please give me lots of your money for my business idea, thanks." Like, is it terrifying? Like, it must be. I mean, I think I would find it terrifying either way, but I'd love to know your experience. Like, is it terrifying thinking, like, this is my little idea that I started, and now I'm asking for money from people, and they're never going to do it, but then they do, and it's, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, when you first do it, when you first have your first conversations, it can be basically just how you described there, Rosie. Like, it's like, oh, like, little me, I can I have some money, please.
Yeah.
But then, like, the more you do it, the more, like, it's like you have to have you grow really thick skin, because, like, let's just say if you message or you talk to 100 investors, half of them probably might not even reply or say no. And then the other like, another 20 will be like, will say like, "Oh, tell me more," than like, "Oh, no, not interested." And then another 20 will be like, like, not, they'll probably decline it after the first call. And then like 5% will just be like, not for me. And then like, then 3%. Then basically what you're left with is like, literally a tiny fraction of the original number that are actually fully interested. So it's a real numbers game where you have to sift through a lot of investors, and you have to kiss a lot of frogs to understand, like, to find that one that's going to actually put money in. So initially it's really tough, but like, you quickly learn that it's like, all right, like, it's fine. Like, firstly, you're not giving me money. Like, this isn't a one-way transaction. I'm selling you what we're doing. You're buying into what I say, or what the company could be. So you're getting a very good rate on what the X turnover or what the X multiplier could be in the end game. So you're getting. It's not like a deal where you're just giving money. It's an exchange of saying, I would like some money to speed up our development. And in exchange, you get some equity and control in the company. But that kind of mindset of saying, like, look, of being like, look, this is what we're doing, and here's what we're asking for, is quite, like, it was hard for me to learn. Well, it's not hard, but like, it was quite difficult to learn, because I had that mindset of like, being like, oh, it's rude to ask, or it's it's like, it's money, it's like, ooh. But then ultimately it's like, no, like, it's my idea. We need this money to do this. Do you want to get involved or not? Because there's money out there. I'm going to find it. Like, you can get involved if you want to, but ultimately, we're going to get this funded. So you can either jump on and come on this journey, or not. It's fine. Yeah. Like, it's not a trick question. I don't want pity. There's no pity money. It's like, put some money in or not. But doing the first few dozen times talking to investors, it gets progressively easier, should we say? Yeah. But ultimately, a lot of these investors are people. They're just. It's not like. It's not Dragon's Den. Dragon's Den is just make believe. Like, they're not sitting there with a pile of money, like, giving you the stink eye when you say something. It's super rational people, or typically, I say super rational. Typically, people who have made a lot of money, especially in the early stage. So these are kind of called angel investors. So these are people who are basically high net worth individuals who like to diversify their money into different risky startups. And then you get like the next stage, which are institutions, like, VCs or family funds, or like, government bodies that you have to meet a lot more criteria, and they have far higher ticket sizes, or they put more money in than the smaller angels do. But the angels, they're just regular people. They just want to talk to you, have a chat, and then say, okay, cool, information, and let's see if something can happen here. But yeah, it gets easier with time. You develop thick skin pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You've got, a lot of business jargon, like the words. Did you take any business courses, or is this just the learning from the past 2 years of doing your own business? Because you come out with things that I'm just like, oh, okay, he knows. I don't know, like, not that I didn't expect you to, but I guess because you're a designer, I kind of see you more of as a designer, but then you're coming out with all these business things. I'm like, he actually knows his shit. He knows what he's talking about. Did you do any business courses, or is it just from learning podcasts or the rest of it?
4 years of experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think firstly it's like being exposed to it. So when you hear people, when you speak to people, and they say stuff like oftentimes it's like don't try and act smart. It's like, okay, well if I hear stuff, I'm like, you said an acronym there. What does that acronym mean? What's an SME, or what's EIS investment? Or like, tell me more about this. So I guess it's partly being inquisitive and trying to learn, reading books. But also, trial by fire. Like when people talk to you about stuff, you need to understand what they're asking. Well, especially in investment terms. Like if an investor asks you something, and you don't know what they're talking about, well, what I do, obviously, never lie. You can't lie. But it's like, something like, great question. I'll get back to you with a response later this afternoon or tomorrow with a reply on that. So it's like just trying to figure. I'm kind of rambling now, but I would say it's a lot of self-teaching. And being exposed to hearing this sort of stuff. So if you're in this area, you'll just hear jargon being thrown around. So you get to learn it pretty quickly. But I didn't think I would know all this stuff that I do now. I'm not my strong points. My traditional strong points, I thought, weren't in business, kind of the world. But I had to increase them.
Yeah.
Company. What a surprise.
It's a one-man show. You have to become...
Yeah, well, currently have a few more people in the team now. And that's another thing, getting people who really add value, who can, who can delegate. I mean, I would say, going back to the hardship, is, delegating stuff, because, I've kind of always been controlling stuff, so it's been a little bit hard for me to kind of delegate
Let
stuff.
go.
But when you find... Yeah, it's like, take this, It's like, be careful with it, don't break my baby. Yeah, exactly. It's... But you just need to find people who you trust, you get on with, who are fit, and who can really add that value. But yeah, it's tough. But that was an art form too. Just sieving through these CVs. That was tough, and having conversations, and and asking the right questions too. I would say one of the best books I've actually read has been The Mum Test. It's a really quick book. You can read it in a couple of hours, but it's such a good book about asking questions and essentially not getting false negatives from people when you ask leading questions. That has been actually running a business, and especially at the early stage, it's been phenomenal in actually trying to gauge more truths in what people say. But yeah, I'm not a big reader, but I've been forced to read more. And Audible's a lifesaver.
Yeah. So to go back to your business, I was watching some videos on your Instagram earlier, and so it's really interesting the way the whole thing works. You buy those pods, and you grow your little insects and stuff like that, and then when they're big enough, you freeze them, you bake them, and then you can feed them to yourself or to your pet if you want, like that, or you can make some kind of flour, just churn off whatever. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of actually I'm buying something on your website, it's coming to my place, how do I go from there to feeding myself or my pet? And also maybe, especially I'm curious, even if it's not what you're doing, how would I eat that personally as a human being? Because I don't know, just an insect, it's just like a chips, it's not very...
Yeah. No, great question. I think, so back in the day, before we pivoted to the pet market, it was basically human consumption. And so you kind of even just demonstrated the steps involved just then when you said you have to you grow them, you then freeze them. You then freeze them, and then you then have to blend them. So there's quite a lot of steps involved for the human consumption, because our current product, our V1 product, is relatively simple. It's essentially multiple. It's a modular tray system that is filled with kind of small holes at different stages and at different heights. And what this does is it passively staggers the life cycle of the mealworm. So earlier I mentioned how there's an egg, then there's a mealworm, then a pupa, then a beetle. Yeah. So what this does is it kind of passively staggers this development. It means that it's a relatively low tech product, which reduces its defensibility in the IP world, but it means that we can get to market quickly, and it's more cost effective, so it's more affordable to people. And then our V2 product will kind of build on this, and will integrate technologies to automate a lot of the processes, so it's much more sophisticated. But ultimately, with the V1, so what this does is it just grows the insects. So let's just say you go to the website, and let's just say we launch in 2 months. When we launch in 2 months, you go to the website. You can buy the growing pods. So this is just these are the growing pods. They have multiple trays. They have carbon filters to absorb any unpleasant odors. They also come with a complimentary pack of starter insects, which you put into the pods, and then that becomes your first generation of beetles. And so it's really key that these beetles are essentially, they're the lifeblood of what's going on, because your beetles lay the eggs. So the more beetle density, the higher beetle density you have, the higher egg output you have. The higher egg output you have, the more mealworms you have to feed to your pets. So you want loads of beetles in there, laying eggs, making love, eating food, eating your waste food, and turning that into mealworms, which you then feed to your pets. So regarding the pets, it's pretty simple. A lot of these pets eat insects in their whole form. So what happens is, when a tray's ready, you literally just take a scoopful out and then give it to, your wild birds, your chickens, your amphibians, your fish, whatever. So it's really simple, which is good. But for a human, you obviously don't want to eat a live, wriggling mealworm. So debatable. Yeah, I think a lot of people will probably.
I would probably.
Okay, yeah, well, yeah. Very cool. But so for a human, so another pain point we found with selling the V1 back in the day when we did the Kickstarter to human market was that there was more processes needed. So because the product is kind of low tech, the initial one, it means that the person that has to decant the insects and then freeze them to humanely kill them, a bit like a lobster, and then you bake them in the oven for a couple of minutes. And then you can either use them in kind of whole, and put them into pasta, or bake with them, or really kind of do anything, or you can blend them and use them as a powder, and this can be used as like a partial flour replacement. So you can use it in baked goods, breads, pizzas. Add it to protein, like a smoothie to give it a protein kick. But there were additional processes needed that wasn't in the product, meaning that ultimately someone's a bit like, okay, well, why would I grow this when I can just buy this? So that it made the sell to human consumption that much harder. So that's why we're looking to develop our technology to automate as much as we can to make the process much more efficient, but also cost effective, and have a higher output, and make it easier for the user just to have fun with it, because convenience is so important. So that's a top priority going forward.
Yeah. And how often would I have to order new insects to lay eggs? Because I'm guessing at some point the beetles are gonna die or stop. I need to renew the.
Yeah. So the great thing about what we're doing is so once you have your starter pack of insects, they then become self-sufficient, because some of the mealworms will pupate and turn into beetles. So you have a continuous supply of insects and beetles. And we're increasingly providing more kind of education and more videos about this on our website to make it really easy to understand, because there is that little bit of knowledge you have to learn to kind of understand everything. So we're trying to make that as easy as possible by having short demo videos and making it super clear and super easy, and also quite fun. It's a bit of a biology kind of experiment. It's It's so there is that that knowledge gap that has to be kind of filled through saying, okay, this is what you get. You buy the pods, you buy the insects, then you're done. Well, you can also buy more carbon filters from us. These are basically pieces of material that absorb any unpleasant odors from the insects. And we also are selling. We will be selling sustainable oat blend, which is what kind of the substrate that the insects kind of live in and kind of eat as their dry food. So we'll be providing a sustainable source, a high protein source, and also a sustainable source of oats that can be used as insect feed. So we're just trying to give value to the customers and say, look, here's the pods, you can use this, but if you want to have if you want to kind of upgrade it, here's some carbon filters. Also, here's some sustainable oats that can optimize your the pet feed. We're really just trying to add value here, and I think that's what we've just got to do going forward is try and see what issues are people having with their pets. How can we make it easier? How can we save them money? How can we increase the pet nutrition? And thirdly, how can we be more sustainable? There really are three values that we're trying to do here. And that's really, whenever I kind of do something, I'm like, all right, it has to be these three things. They're our core values here at the Bug Factory.
I love this. I would try it personally. I would have one at home for myself.
It's interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, in France, I eat snails, a sluggish one with plenty of saliva. So I would eat a dry insect with no problem.
It would be quite fun to see what you could do with it as well, how you could get away with putting it in people's food without them knowing.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, there is a slight correlation with shellfish allergies and being allergic to insects. So if you do put some insects in someone's food, make sure they're not allergic to shellfish.
Okay, good advice.
Good advice,
Something you mentioned is about it's educational and making it fun, and I guess it could be quite a good thing to get kids involved as well, because they can see the insects growing and evolving, and then they see the whole process and how that then becomes food. And is that something that you're marketing towards, or something that you've noticed is a selling point for your clients, or I don't know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. It's really interesting. I mean, I guess in marketing terms, you kind of call this market segments. So we have our kind of core segments of kind of small pet owners, which can be subdivided into aquafeed, reptiles, poultry, wild birds. So you can kind of subdivide it there. But then also there's also some other fringe areas that education, for example, having this as an educational tool. And also then, Jeremy, you also said, having it to eat yourself. So, there's another, going back to edible insects, there's also a fringe case there. So it's trying to find out, ultimately what I'm trying to do here is initially think like a monopoly, try and create a monopoly in the small pet segment market. And then, because if you can't dominate your key niche, you can't really expand organically. Yeah. So the education market is something that really interests me. It's just, unless you partnering with schools, I've been toying around with some different ideas, but we have, because we're pre-launch, we have all these assumptions, and we're going to do what we think we're going to do, and then who knows what will be in 6 months. It might be a more educational piece than it is pet feed, but for me it's quite an exciting time of testing assumptions and seeing what will happen, because ultimately we can do what we can, but ultimately the market will decide. Get me back on maybe in 6 months time, and
I'd love to. What about things like restaurants? Is that something that you could partner with, and they can make their own, and then, like you said, put it into pastas? And is there any market? Are there any restaurants that are currently using that would make it easy if they had your product?
Yeah, the key thing here is it's kind of like it's a lot of it's linked to size and output. So there's a reason why chefs and restaurants don't typically grow all their produce. Yeah. Because you need space. So similarly to what we're doing, to have something that will have a significant output for a restaurant, you need quite a large unit, and space is like a premium, especially in restaurants. So that was actually a consideration in the early days of making something much more substantial. Something like a fridge, like a large fridge, and then having that as a unit. But then kind of went away from that idea. But that is still an idea. But yeah, it's trying to have it was, and ultimately talking to chefs again. I'll big up the mum book. No, sorry, the mum test. That's what it's called, the mum test. Talk to people who you think might be your customers. Talk to chefs and be like, hey, what do you grow here? Do you have anything like, oh no, space is a premium here. Like, I wouldn't even grow herbs. We have someone who does that. We have someone for our fish. We have someone for our pasta. We're a small kitchen here in London. So it's like, okay, well, would you have space for anything? Like, oh no, like, it's a premium. Like, it has to be able to be clean. It has to be hygienic. So you quickly learn what is or isn't feasible from asking good questions, or I say subjectively good questions to people who you think might buy it.
No, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's like you said before. It's a lot of trial and error, and it's so interesting because the more we've been talking to you, the more I realize like the potential of the market for your company is huge. It could be huge. There's so much potential clients for it when you think about it. When at the beginning I was like bugs. There's so many things, and I think it's going to be very interesting to watch because obviously, as a society, we are realizing that the way we live right now is not sustainable, that we need to be more mindful of our resources and how we eat and act and live and everything. So it's very, very, very early, and you're very early. So it'll be interesting to see, in more like 2030, where insect will be in our life, because I think it'll be a totally different conversation then, and I mean, hopefully you'll still be around and you'll be, the main provider for everyone. I mean, that's what I wish for you. But we are at the early stage of this potential revolution, I think.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like it's super early, but like things are changing dramatically fast. I think actually, just earlier this week or last month, that Morrison's, one of the largest UK supermarkets, are now using insects to feed all their chickens for all their eggs. So every egg you buy from this huge UK supermarket has been reared on insect protein. So these things, they're changing, and it's more of a systems change where you kind of need, to have a huge impact, you need kind of governments and legislation and organizations. But like on the individual level, it's like, okay, which brings me back to why I kind of did what I did, is what tools can we do for the individual? It's a bit like having a herb garden, or or growing something yourself. Giving yourself the tool that can enable you to just reduce your own, or have your own impact. Maybe it's a little bit of virtue signaling, but it's a little bit of saying, look, I'm doing my part. It's a quirky, fun product. But yeah, no, it's a really exciting, and this is what really gets me excited about, because a classic investor question is okay, so what's the future? Where will you be in the next 5 years? Because people give you money because they don't give it for you for nothing. They want
you want a return.
They want you to have an exit plan to say, okay, in the next 4 to 6 years, we'll be acquired by this company, or we'll be acquired by blah blah blah. But then it's like, but in the meantime, it's like, okay, well, we might be in the pet sector, but then developing our tech in the next year or two, we'll then be able to apply what we're doing into different verticals, that can have a larger impact. So it could be producing insects on a larger scale in for edible insects, or developing growing systems that can be deployed in low and middle income countries, so they can have a more sustainable source of protein for them to maybe eat, or for them to feed to livestock, depending on the region. But yeah, I mean, it's really exciting, and I think the future it's a really exciting place. And we're in the pet sector now, but who knows where we'll be in 2-3 years. I think it's growing fast, and yeah, it's a fun time. I'm having a blast.
Can we have you on every year?
I really want
to follow your journey and what happens and the statistics and.
I've got to say, I didn't think I would be so excited about bugs.
Yeah. Oh, when we launch, I'll send you guys down. A sample, and we'll get you trying it out, maybe. If you.
Oh my god, that would be amazing.
That'd be fun.
All right.
No, but yeah, we definitely need to do a follow up on that, because I'm very, very curious to know what's going to happen when you launch, and also the evolution of the market and of your business at the same time, because I don't know, my brain is like this and that and this and that.
Yeah.
So from the little that I know, so I can't even imagine your brain where it must be going.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's been a fun journey. It's and yeah, just I mean, this is a year really. You've talked to me at a very interesting time where we'll really know. I think we'll know what we're like in the next 8 months. We'll know if what we're doing is shit hot or just shit. In a nutshell.
It's going to go one way or another. We'll soon see.
Yeah, and that's the beauty, you have to have fun, push what you're doing, believe in what you're doing. But yeah, it's a process. It's a process, and it's been a blast so far.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Thomas, for your time. And yeah, I'm really excited to have you back on the show and to follow the growth of your business. And I wish you all the best, honestly, because I think it's a brilliant idea, honestly. And the way you're executing is obviously working. So I wish you all the best. And yeah, we'll talk next year to know exactly where you are. Got one last question before we wrap it up.
Yeah, this is a question we ask everyone. Okay. A little bit random, I know, not related to what we've been talking about, but if you could have a conversation with anybody, dead or alive, famous or not famous, it can be literally anybody who's ever existed, who you think would be the most interesting person, who would you choose and why?
Oh, that is a tricky one. All right, I don't want to go with a really obvious one because I feel like some people could do that. This is actually a tricky one.
First thing coming to your head.
The first thing coming into my head. Well, personally, I would love to talk to, it has to be right now because what I'm doing, it has to be someone like, someone who's like, breaking boundaries. So like, I would love to talk to Elon Musk. I would love to talk to him and just figure out how the hell he does all this stuff. How does he? Yeah. What's it like? Some secrets that he's learned over the years, so he can just create all these companies and have such an impact while just being one person. So yeah, I think. That's probably a generic answer I've given you, but yeah, that's the first person who came to my mind.
No, honestly, like every time we ask guests, we never had this answer. This is my answer as well. Personally, that would be my choice, but I'm the only one so far who said that. So
yeah, I think so, yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah. I'm not too basic.
No. So yeah, I'll join you if that happens. I'll join you if that's all right. But yeah, no, I agree with you. It's like, how can you wake up one day and say, like, I'm gonna go to Mars to save the human race?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bananas.
Yeah, he's an interesting individual. His personal life seems a bit chaotic. But,
hasn't he just got kids popping out everywhere from different women all the time?
Yeah.
I've lost track. I keep up to date more so with his businesses rather than his the paparazzi. But,
personal life.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'll probably keep our talk to business maybe.
Yeah.
Not about wives.
Definitely. And names. Yeah. Thomas, thank you so much. I will make sure to leave the website and your socials in the show note. But yeah, the Bug Factory, based in the UK, launching soon. So make sure you follow. I will be following for sure. And I'm very, very excited to have you back on the show to see where this amazing journey takes you. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, Rosie, Jeremy, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. Can't wait, like Jeremy said, to have you on the show next year and follow your journey. And yeah, I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. We'll be back next Wednesday with a brand new episode, and we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.